In this session, we'll be talking about functional classification of urban settlements. So we basically will be dealing with how the urban settlements are classified on the basis of functions. Now, broadly speaking, when we talk about urban functions, there are two kinds of urban functions. One is called as basic function and other is called as non-basic function. Now, when we say basic function, it means such function in the city or in the urban area that basically provides goods and services for export out of the settlement. So basically, it's a function that caters to the population which is residing out of the settlement, out of that particular town or city. While non-basic function basically means the function or an activity that provide goods and services for the city dwellers for satisfying their own demands. For example, if there is a very small cow shed or a cattle shed which is selling milk, so as the cattle shed is very small, it sells the milk only for the people living in the nearby area. So it is only serving the very local population. So that cattle shed or that milk selling in the cattle shed becomes an example of a non-basic function. However, imagine a very huge cattle shed or maybe a small milk processing unit that is selling milk not only to the people residing in the city, but also to the people residing out of that city. So the commodity here or the milk is going out of the city and catering the markets which are located beyond the city. So that becomes basic function or basic urban function. Now, when we say that we are classifying urban settlements on the basis of function, we basically mean classification on the basis of basic functions, because we all know that cities are very much multifunctional. They carry out number of functions. However, when we look at classifying on the basis of function, we need to classify on the basis of one function particularly. And that function basically is a basic function of that particular urban area, or let us say the most important, the most predominant function of that particular city. For example, when we say an industrial city, it doesn't mean that there is no other activity other than industry which is that is carried out in the city. But industry is the most dominant, is a major basic urban function which is carried out in the city. Though there may be other basic functions, but they are relatively less dominant, relatively less important than industry. So we identify that particular urban center with that most dominant, most important basic urban function of that place. And as we also know that as the settlements grows, as the settlement develops from a town to city and to metropolis to megalopolis, etc., then we all know that the city grows in terms of the geographical area, in terms of the population. So in the process, the functional base of the city also widens, and the most dominant function also may undergo change in the due in the due course of time. So let's understand how we can classify urban settlements based on function. Now, the first classification we'll talk about is administrative towns. As the name suggests, that the administrative towns are those towns whose basic function is administration. Obviously, such towns are the capital of the states or the countries, or maybe the headquarters of a particular political unit, sub-regional or sub-national political unit, such as in case of India, and headquarter of a state or headquarter of a district or a taluka or a tehsil also becomes an administrative towns. These administrative towns are obviously ordered hierarchically. So there is hierarchy in terms of in terms of administrative functions. So national capital, for example, is located at the higher level as compared to taluka level headquarter or a tehsil headquarter. So there is a hierarchical order in a case of administrative towns. Now, when we say administrative towns, I mean how to identify it uh, in a simple way is obviously to looking around, to move around the city and find out. And the most important uh, uh, land use or most important buildings in such cities are the ones that carry out administrative functions. So, for example, in case of national capital like Delhi, so we basically what we see is the parliament located there, and other very significant buildings of administrative importance, national administrative importance located there. So similarly, if we go to to a state capital, then we have the offices of different ministries, secretariats, many other public buildings are found there. So these are the, I mean, so the entire built up area, the land use is also such that it basically concerned with administration or public administration. And because it's a headquarter of a political unit or an administrative unit, we also find the headquarters of the major public services or government services located in such cities, such as the post office, the banks, or the railways, etc. Numerous examples can be given. For example, Delhi, Washington, London, and Paris are some of the international or world level examples, while Lucknow, Gandhinagar, Patna are significant administrative examples of administrative towns in India. After administrative towns, the second classification we can talk about are defense towns. Defense towns are those towns whose function is to defend, or the function which is related to defense. Now, because they are supposed to defend a big region, usually such towns are located at a very strategic location or strategic places. So it can be around a fort or atop the hill. Such defense towns are basically located. Now, as I was just mentioning, the defense towns provide necessary security and protect the territorial integrity and sovereignty of the region. Defense towns also, as when we move around, we can easily see. I mean, we can make out that that there is a defense function, because in such cases we'll find that the entry of the civilians is not allowed in certain areas where the defense functions are on, or we very much find barracks or military training facilities, airfields, docks and harbors that are serving the military purposes. So such specific kind of functions and associated built up areas we observe in defense towns. So fort towns, garrison towns, or air bases or naval bases or cantonments are the kind of towns which are usually defense towns. So Jaisalmer in Rajasthan, or Khadki and Devlali in Maharashtra. These are some very good examples of fort towns or the cantonment towns, respectively. World level examples again can be London, Cologne, or Le Havre in France, or Satara, Ahmednagar, Jaipur, Jodhpur, Gwalior, etc. From India. So these are all defense towns. Third important classification can be cultural centers. Now, when we say cultural centers, that's a broad category. Within cultural centers, now we can talk about religious towns, educational towns, entertainment towns, etc. So these are the towns where the culture is a very significant function. Now, culture may be reflected in terms of religion, maybe in terms of education, maybe in terms of culture, maybe in terms of any specific art form, or in certain with specific entertainment services. So accordingly, we can sub-classify cultural center into religious towns, educational towns, or entertainment towns. Again, depending upon what is the major function, we'll find the built-up area and the land uses accordingly. For example, in such towns, in general, cultural centers, we find provision of education, presence of art galleries or religious shrines, entertainment services. These are the most important functions that are located in cultural centers. When we talk about religious places or pilgrimage centers, obviously the religious shrine or the religious monument becomes the most important, or rather the center of the entire place. It can be a temple or a mosque or a church or any other religious place uh, around which the entire city is built, or around which the rest of the functions are located. So, number of examples like Mecca and Medina, Rome, Jerusalem, Lancashire, Yorkshire in UK, or Varanasi, Dwarka, Rameshwaram from India. These can be and then numerous other examples of such pilgrimage centers or the religious towns. Towns that are specialized in educational services again are the ones where the educational institutions, especially of the higher order, are located. So it may be having university headquarters or more than one university located in such towns. At the same time, research institutions, the training institutions, the headquarters. So everything related to education we'll find in abundance in such in such towns. So we have university towns, for example, where the university is a center and around which the town is built or developed. So Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard. So these are all examples of university towns. While in India, again, there are numerous examples, but as we specifically talk of Maharashtra, then Pune is especially known as an educational city. Again, as I was mentioning in the beginning of the session, that it doesn't mean that Pune is only educational city and no other activity, but that's the most important activity with which the city is identified with. Entertainment towns are the ones where the entertainment, leisure, recreation becomes a very important function. So, as such towns have different kind of games areas or shopping malls, etc. Hollywood and Las Vegas in United States, or Cannes in France. These are some of the examples of entertainment towns. So as I was saying that when you go and move around the city, you can see the reflection of the most important function or the basic urban function into the built-up area. So it's that way easily visible, of what kind of town or what's the identity of the town in terms of the basic urban function. There are certain towns which are meant for recreation. These are basic kind of tourist centers, but based on recreation, where people only want to go for leisure and recreation. So we have a number of towns specialized in specific services associated with recreation. So we may look at health resorts or tourist centers, holiday resorts, hill stations, all as examples of recreation centers. In case of India, we have numerous such resort towns or the tourist centers along the beaches in Goa or beaches in Kerala, where it has been developed. In Kerala and many other parts of South India, we know that many health resorts have developed with the facilities related to the naturopathy, the alternative medicine, yoga, or the naturopathy. All these associated health facilities are provided with. Resort towns usually are the towns which are located a bit close to the biggest urban center in the area. So some resort towns also we can classify or call them as the weekend resort towns, or the places known for weekend tourism, where usually the urban tourists travel during the weekend to such areas. They are located with a very easy access from the city. So Alibag and the nearby areas in Maharashtra near Mumbai, or Jawhar again in the vicinity of Mumbai, are some local examples of resort centers. So there are many large cities that promote such activities, recreational activities, sport complexes, etc. So depending upon any particular recreation service that or the function that the city offers, the recreation centers can further be sub classified accordingly. So many hill stations, as we know that in many hilly and mountainous terrains, we do find hill stations. All these are significant examples of a recreational center. Collection centers are basically the centers that collect the resources or collect the commodities, and then they transport it further for further processing or in the market areas. For example, mining towns. Mining towns have a job of collecting the mineral resources, mining the mineral resource, and then sending it for further processing, or then sending it for the industries, etc. Fishing towns where the fish catch is the fishing is a main activity. So the fish which is collected is then again sold in the nearby market or sent outside of that town for selling purpose or for any further processing industry. Lumbering towns again are significant towns where lumbering is a major activity. Again, as I was saying, that whenever you move around such towns, you will very much find the impression of these basic functions in the built-up areas, in certain kinds of buildings that you will find in such area. Certain associated activities you will find. When you go to a fishing town, for example, you will not just find fishing, but you will find people engaged in repairing their fishing nets, or fisherwomen especially engaged in the in the sorting of the fishes or drying of the fishes on the beach areas. So there are a number of associated functions also that very much we can see in such urban centers. Some examples of such collection centers in general, as I said, that depending upon the function, we can subclassify them into mining towns, fishing towns, etc. In general, when we say collection centers, examples like Johannesburg in South Africa, or Kiruna in Sweden, or Raniganj and Jharia in India. These are some of the important examples of the collection centers. So again, as we move around, we do find this is a typical mining village. So you can see the mines around and associated functions, specific transport services, the houses of the laborers or colonies of the laborers. So certain unique things that we will find which is associated with that basic urban function of the city. Production centers are basically the centers that are involved in manufacturing, producing, maybe a general production or a very specialized production. So production centers also can be called as the industrial cities. These are the cities that have all those positive factors that promote and encourage industrialization, such as availability of resources, labor, abundant labor, or power and energy supply, water supply, land availability, or the availability of capital and associated institutions related to banking and finance or insurance. So all these things that promote or encourage development of industries are found in such cities. And one of the most important feature is the very well developed transport network, because connectivity, accessibility are very significant things for the development of a place as production center or in industrial cities. At international level, we can give number of examples. Few are mentioned in the slide, like Pittsburgh or Milano, Osaka. So they're significant production centers, while Jamshedpur, Bhilai, Kanpur, Ahmedabad, Surat, a number of other examples from India as far as production centers are concerned. Again, it's a typical skyline that we observe in industrial cities with a lot of industries around. So the buildings having a very specific roofing style, the chimneys like skyrocketing in the and overall skyline is very irregular because of this. So again, associated functions or associated subsidiary activities or offices are also found. Labor quarters, labor residential quarters. So there are again associated functions that can be found in such localities. Transfer and distribution centers are the ones who work like as a link between two places. So a product come from place A and then it is collected at this place and then further transported to place B. So it's a very significant link. So that place becomes a very significant link where the commodities are transferred and further distributed. So transport is the most important role. So unless and until there is development of transport, transfer or distribution centers cannot develop in such localities. So some specific locations include the break of the bulk point, where it becomes necessary to change over the mode of transport. So for example, from road transport, we are moving into a river transport. For example, if you go to places like Goa, there are numerous locations in Konkan, also in western coastal plains in India. Also, we find that there are many such break of bulk points where you have to change over, that you have to cross a river. So from road transport, you take a ferry and again continue your travel in road transport. So there are activities such as loading and unloading of the commodities that need to be done at such break of bulk points. Market towns are very typical transfer and distribution centers. Port cities are particularly very significant in this case, in this particular context. So the port cities like Tokyo, New York, Kolkata, Shanghai, Sydney, Mumbai is also a port city, and these are very significant seaports. And because they are port cities, as a port, there are a number of functions that are carried out, but transfer and distribution of commodities remains a very significant functions. And again, depending upon what kind of port it is, we can further go into detail of what kind of port city it is. So there can be certain ports are general ports like Malacca in Malaysia, or passenger ports like Bermuda or Jamaica, or entrepot ports like Singapore, or naval ports like Mumbai. So depending upon again specific functions carried by that particular port, we can further subclassify the port cities. So as we move Mumbai, especially the South Mumbai, we do find extensive development of a port, and which is again of colonial origin. Next important functional town is residential town. As the term suggests, residential towns basically are the towns where residential or residence is a dominant urban function. These are the areas usually located a bit close to the city, where the people from such areas, such residential towns, commute daily to the city for the purpose of work, and therefore such towns are they do not have any significant urban function as such, but it basically offers residential services in the vicinity of the big towns, so that people can stay at relatively cheaper rate compared to the main city, but at the same time are a bit closer to the city, better accessible with transport, so that for everyday commute, such towns becomes significant. Residential towns become significant. So such towns are important because they keep the main city a bit free of congestion or a bit free of concentration. As such, all people cannot stay in the main city for a number of reasons, and the most important reason is affordability and pollution, crowding, etc. And so people prefer to live little away from the city, but within the reach of the city with a better accessibility. In case of Mumbai, there are so many such towns spread out in Mumbai metropolitan region or just outside of Mumbai metropolitan region. Vasai and Virar, for example, are very specific examples of residential towns in the vicinity of Mumbai. So as I was mentioning that based on what is the most dominant function of your city or of the place, we can classify that particular city accordingly. So we just now have talked about different classifications or different types of urban settlements based on functions. I repeat that cities are multifunctional, so they can be classified on the basis of a number of functions. However, when we do the classification, we basically take into consideration the basic urban function of that particular place, the most dominant, the important function of that place, and then with which that particular urban settlement is basically identified with, and accordingly we have seen different kinds of functional types of settlement. I hope you have understood with multiple examples. There are a number of any more examples can be given. Just few were on the slide. I hope you have understood this topic, as it's quite simple one. But still, if you have any queries, you can contact me. Thanks a lot.